Hello everyone, welcome to our first inaugural episode of Learnerator Educational Public Radio, or Ed-PR. Today I have with me Megan Iranpour, who is our AP French language teacher, and we're doing sort of a mini-series on the most pressing issue in education today. We have a lot of other topics, but this one will be a recurring one with different teachers offering their different opinions on what they view as a very pressing issue in education. And to give some background on Megan first, Megan is a National Board Certified teacher, and this past summer she wrote over 1,200 questions for our AP French language course, which was basically shattered all of our records for any teacher creating content for us. So she is a rock star. Megan, do you want to add anything else about the sort of school you teach at and your students real quick, so our listeners can have some more background about what it is that where you're coming from?
Absolutely. I am in my 10th year of teaching, and I have spent all 10 of those years at Lexington Catholic High School, which is in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm the only French teacher there, which I love very much because I get to see them go full picture, starting with nothing and ending with something that we did together. So it's really rewarding. So I'm looking forward to spending a lot more time there.
Awesome. So let's move on to your chosen quote. So do you want to explain this quote, "True happiness equals reality minus expectations," and why you chose it for this conversation?
Sure. I don't think I would have chosen such a quote, say, 10 years ago, but adulthood is often a hard teacher. So I chose that because it's a quote that has applied realistically to me in my professional career and in my personal life, where I look back and I reflect at moments that didn't go well for me in the classroom or that didn't go well for me as an adult, and I wonder why I'm so grumpy about it. And often it's because what I had expected to happen and what really happened were way different. And so I walked away from, let's say, an assessment, a test, and I thought, man, I really nailed that content. And then the tests come back, and my expectations and reality were off. So why am I unhappy? Let's go back and figure that out. Or in my personal life, where, I think that I'm going to live in this sort of house, and then when I find out that's way out of my price range, now we're talking reality versus expectations. So I find it's very grounded as a quote and very applicable to me in all circles of my life.
Awesome. And I'm sure that as we go through our conversation, we'll find ways that it applies to teaching specifically. Which kind of leads me to move on to our topic of the day, which you've chosen as differentiation. And so, not to read off the slide, but I'll just let you kind of explain the background of what you mean by differentiation and why you believe this is the most pressing issue in education.
Sure. Well, as we all feel the pressure as educators from our colleagues, from our administrators, from parents, from national initiatives, and from good pedagogy, we are finding every year that our learner that is coming to us in the classroom is very different from his neighbor, who's very different from his neighbor in all ways. They come from different races, religion, and ethnic groups. They come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. They come from different reading abilities. They come from, to me, as a French teacher, they come from different backgrounds and experience with having French in middle school, and then you're looking at motivation levels are different. So how do I make all of those kids in the same room learn at the level that they are at currently without making the gifted kids bored and the strugglers run over? I think it's one of the most challenging things I've faced in my 10 years of teaching, and will continue to work to face, because the problems change every year and new things develop as you go.
I mean, it sounds like what you're getting at is basically the heart of teaching in terms of adapting always to changing circumstances, to very different students from very different backgrounds, especially if you're not at a elite private school, which is a very small portion of students where you handpick your students, right? So when you're in an open environment, really you're saying that you have to be very adaptive to the students, and if you're not, then that's really failing to bring out the best in them, and that's why you believe this is a very urgent thing that should be discussed.
Absolutely, and my school in particular has opened as part of our facility. It's called High Marks, where we are specifically addressing the learning needs of autism, dyslexia, and ADHD. So we are now drawing a population of students who are looking to us to help them in all their content areas meet learning content benchmarks despite these sometimes crippling learning disabilities. So anybody anywhere is going to be facing kids like this, and sometimes they get the support they need and sometimes they don't. So what's a teacher to do when you're, it's a constant battle. So yes, a constant battle.
So let's get a bit more specific and speak to the other French teachers out there and talk about how this applies in your classroom and with French in general, and maybe we can extrapolate to other world languages. But I'll move on to your second slide and kind of let you talk about what specifically you see in your classroom, and after that we'll go into the final slide, which is kind of the takeaways and strategies that you've developed. But first, let's kind of talk about, what does this mean in the context of an AP French classroom, right?
Right. In an AP French classroom, I'm looking at a wide variety of skills. Even if you have students like mine who, by the time they get to AP, that's the fourth year they've been with me. But you can look out into the room and you can say, this girl always struggles with grammar, or this girl always struggles with pronunciation, or this boy always struggles with vocabulary. And so how do you make sure that each kid can get help in their areas of weakness, and how can you flush out their areas of strength so that they feel like they're a cohesive part of the classroom? And then you're looking at, in many schools, you have to think about how these kids are balancing their whole lives. And we all know their executive functions are not as awesome as we want them to be because they're not there yet. Their brains are still developing. And so how do I get them to do AP French at home when the vast chasm of the internet is distracting them? And so you look at a lot of things. Their parents are pulling them one way, the internet's pulling them one way, their teachers are pulling them one way. So how do I reach all these different kids and help them feel good about themselves so that they want to work on the areas of weakness?
Do you find that sort of the biggest differentiator between your students is prior experience in French, or is it more sort of broad, like do they have well-developed study skills and are they generally very well-read and literate, or is it specifically more French that makes the difference?
I think French, at my school, we offer French and Latin and Spanish. And we do notice, we talk among our department colleagues, we talk about that there does seem to be a certain type of student who is attracted to different types of language. For example, when we pitch to incoming 8th graders our Latin program, we pitch Latin as a very analytical and mathematical language, and those types of students tend to be drawn to that type of language. So I usually, unfortunately, get very little students, almost none some years, that have had any experience with French before. So that absolutely has no factor in their success. In fact, sometimes those students who've had French before, they don't develop those study skills and problem-solving habits right away. So then when the pedal hits the metal, they don't know what to do, and their peers have been learning and coping with their struggles for long enough. They've developed good learning habits, and then sometimes those kids are disadvantaged. But I think it's all about knowing how the brain acquires language and develops language, and good studying, like working smarter instead of working harder, and understanding how your brain works in terms of language acquisition is key, and that goes along with how you then study. In my opinion, those are the greatest contributors to getting a kid who might not otherwise do well to do well.
Okay, that's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure that many teachers experience this across the spectrum of different subject areas, because when I speak to teachers and we're doing interviews and stuff like that, a lot of them tell me, especially in AP classes like human geography, where they get a lot of freshmen, I've heard sort of over and over that the level of incoming students and their reading levels has been gradually declining, even at some of the best high schools. So one of the department chairs at the #1 ranked high school in Tennessee told me that they just see reading levels going down, and they're almost having to adjust to that rather than pushing them. And so I think this is definitely something that every teacher everywhere probably faces to some degree in terms of varying levels of students and different family situations, different learning strategies, and how do you adapt, right?
Right. I even had a young man last year who was on a 3rd grade reading level as a freshman, and you think, how on earth, and I mean, this poor, first of all, he has to feel constant struggle in all these classes, and then now I'm going to tell him, oh, reread, you want to learn this language because you're doing so well with reading in the one that you're currently speaking. It's very challenging. And then when you talk about study habits, many of those are just completely thrown out the window, because if they can't read, then things like, say, Quizlet, those are more work than they're worth for a student like that. That's a big issue. And my students don't like to read anymore. It's sad to me, because I'm so bookish, that they do not enjoy reading for pleasure. And I think the two go hand in hand. But it is definitely an issue that is not going to change, that we're going to need to face, I think, more every year.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but sort of, I'm of a younger generation. I'm only 24, and it seems to me that with all the social media and kind of technology these days, people prefer to digest information in very small pieces as opposed to reading a lengthy book. But that's probably a discussion for another time. I believe that it's only a problem if you have a solution. So let's kind of move on to your takeaways for strategies that you've developed to better offer differentiated teaching, and we'll kind of use that as advice for other teachers and what they can be doing. So I think you start with freedom of choice, fair isn't always equal, and compromise and expectations. Do you want to just talk through each of those points and elaborate on what you mean?
Sure. I remembered later in my 10 years of teaching, digesting all of these theories and these educational, pedagogical, theorems that were, when I was in graduate school, thinking, okay, so how do I make this real? But the older that I get in my teaching career, I start to notice that every kid comes to me with a very diverse interest level and a diverse amount of talent. And so I started in the last 5 or so years in 2 ways giving kids freedom of choice, which they very much like because they feel in control. And one of those ways is that I got away from, in my assessments, specifically asking for specific vocabulary words, where I would say, okay, how do you say to go for a bike ride? And instead I would say, list some activities that you can do in the summertime. And sometimes they would be the expressions from the book, and sometimes they weren't. They were expressions I came to find out that they had gone home and found out because they were very interested in skateboarding, let's say, and it wasn't in the book, but they went home, they had the initiative and the drive to figure it out. So I stopped penalizing kids for not knowing the one word that I thought was important that they know. Instead, I was willing, on my end, to compromise and say, fine, don't memorize faire du vélo. Instead, come up with some things so that conversationally, when you get off the airplane, you can tell somebody what you like to do. And then the other way in which I give them freedom of choice is in the amount of activities that they can do for credit. So in my AP class, because I know that's why I'm here, is because I'm an AP French teacher, I need them to have daily exposure to French, and I need to also balance that with their very busy lives. So I'm looking at, okay, how can I get them to do something with French from 10 to 20 minutes a night, and it be meaningful and interesting to them. And so I devised a point system whereby 10 points of things are my choosing, and those are related to the College Board themes, things like looking out on the French news for articles that specifically relate to science and technology. And then the other 30 points per grading period are their choice. Things like watch a French movie and write a critique, or why don't you pick a book you like in English, I will help you order the French version and you can do a book report, or why don't you critique and review this new Belgian artist Tolme's CD, and tell me what you think about it. And so you'll find kids will not even touch the movies. They don't care a whit about the movies. They'd rather do vocab games or listen to music. And then there's other kids that are bummed that they don't have to do anymore after they've watched 2 movies, and they say, do you have any more? Can I watch more movies? Or so once I tap in and once they find out they have freedom to do what interests them, I find that they're exceeding my desire for them to spend 15-ish minutes a night on French. So that's what I mean by freedom of choice. And fair isn't always equal, kind of relates to differentiation.
Well, let me just comment on the freedom of choice thing, because I once watched a TED Talk about a guy talking about how math and science education in the U.S. is very broken, because the way that we teach math and science in high school is we just beat them over the head with, here's like 30 practice problems to do every day, and you turn them in, you get graded on them, right? Obviously, if it's graded on accuracy, you go and meet up with your friends and make sure you all have the right answers. But really, it seems like it applies across the board, because when you do that, you sort of destroy the curiosity and like discovery of the knowledge. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're saying, here's like an open-ended destination, right? What are things to do in the summertime? And you let students have their own sense of discovery, so that it's not them being forced to memorize things. It's them thinking about, well, what would I like to do in the summertime? And let me figure out a way to try to say that. And I'm motivated to do that because that's personal to me, right?
Correct.
So
yeah, and even there's several books out currently. One is Never Work Harder Than Your Students, and they promote this idea that homework should always be just for practice, and that grading homework is a terrible idea, because how do I grade that kid who's struggling to read and his homework against the kid who would get an A if the only grade was homework? And that's actually what motivated me to change the system, was I started to realize some of my kids with an A in French, they couldn't speak any French, they couldn't read it, they couldn't write it, they couldn't speak it. And then I had this kid over here with a D who was a great speaker, and I realized I wasn't grading on skills.
Right.
And that's kind of what promoted this, was their grade was not reflective of skills. Their grade was reflective on could they do their homework and put it into the tray. And that was bad teaching on my part. And so, I mean, lessons hard learned, but that's exactly right. That I killed their curiosity. I drowned them in paperwork. And me too, for the record, and nobody learned anything, and I left feeling bummed, and they left feeling bummed. So that's absolutely the line of thinking here.
I mean, it's so interesting that it's so clear to you and me. I mean, even though I've never been a teacher, but it makes a lot of sense. But that's how it's done usually, right? So that's kind of what's crazy.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of what fair isn't always equal. That's hard for me as a teacher, because most of us got into teaching because we love every detail and all the geeky, bookish, we get all into it, and the kids are like, who cares? And that's hard to compromise what you love and your passion for the bigger picture. Like, I want them to know faire du vélo. I want them to know every vocab word on that list, but the reality is they can go to France and they can survive, or they can go to Canada and they can survive without that expression. And so that's what I mean also by compromise, is that I have to look at their skills in the bigger picture and make sure they're leaving me with the ability to solve their own problems rather than the ability to take my tests and ace them.
So the compromise is more compromise on the teacher's part.
It can be, and it can be a compromise on the student's part, where you have to say, because I'm spoiled and I get them for 4 years, I can say, just trust me. Trust the process here. It's very hard to break them. By the time I get them as freshmen, it's a memorizing list of vocab for classes, not just language classes, but classes, for so long that they almost, in the first couple weeks of school, I inevitably get emails from parents that are like, Luke is so overwhelmed. He's just trying to memorize every word. And I'm like, why? Oh my gosh, I just threw like 65 vocab words at them, and the brain can only hold 7 new things of information. Instead, he needs to step back and pick vocab. And that's hard for them. They don't like that answer at first because they're not used to that. It's rough to kind of break them and teach them to compromise, especially the gifted students, because they see that list of 65 vocab words as a personal challenge. and instead end up imploding because they are really desperately trying to get that cookie and get you to go, oh, you're so smart because you memorized all 65. But instead, they also have to compromise and say, fine, I will not know all of the words on this list. So it runs both ways, but and on my end as well, that I have to say, you know what, maybe we won't get to that last unit because we need to sit here in this unit and get better. And it goes back to feedback and evaluation, in my professional opinion, where I was in school once, we were all students once, and I teach with people who give a test and it's not graded 3 months later. And I don't know how they move on when they don't know how their current, student body is performing. And what's the point? Why did you give the test at all if you never intended to use the data to inform next steps? And so sometimes compromise means 1 year we get to Unit 7 and the next year we don't. And that bugs me because I like Unit 7 and I want to do Unit 7. But you have to do what works for the kids and make sure that they leave with skills and confidence.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just basically saying don't lose sight of the big picture and what you're trying to accomplish, and don't get too caught up in the weeds. And, I like that we're ending on this compromise and having a healthy dose of expectations and reality, because it ties very nicely with the quote that we opened up this chat with. And so I think that's a really nice 360 back from end to beginning. And I'm sure that, a lot of forward-thinking teachers like yourself probably think this is so obvious to allow freedom of choice and look at the big picture, and hopefully we will kind of move some other teachers in the same direction. But for now, let's kind of wrap it up for the content part and move on to the rapid fire round, which is where I'll ask you some quick questions and you'll give some quick answers, kind of first thing that comes to your mind. And okay, here we go. So what is the best teaching advice that you've ever received?
The best teaching advice I ever received was to be a human. I know that there's that philosophy out there that don't let them see you smile until November. But my
is that real?
Yeah, I hear it every year.
Okay.
And I would fail miserably if that was my resolve, because I'm a funny person and I think things are funny. I'd never make it. So, but the fact is, you're right. It seems so clear cut, and when I talk about it, and because I believe in it so much, it does seem easy. But the fact is, it's not. And the fact is, if teaching is anything, it is making mistake after mistake after mistake and learning and learning. You're never done learning. And so when I think the advice to be human is powerful, because everybody thinks that's when the kids eat you alive. And I personally have found the opposite to be true, that when you say, hey guys, you know what, number 7 on the test, I worded that really stupidly and you all did very badly, and I said, you know what, this is my fault, I'm going to take it out of the score. They respect that, and they respect that you were honest enough with them to say, hey, you know what, guys, this is never over. You messing up, it never ends. You keep doing it as an adult, and it's how you deal with it that teaches them to, and in turn, I found that then later when they mess up and I forgive them, then it's mutual.
Right.
And so if you open that good professional student-teacher relationship and you show them you're just a regular human being who goes home and has a regular life just like them, then it really helps. It really helps make the whole thing from start to finish a lot nicer and easier. So basically, smile before November is what you're saying. Yes, please smile on the first day.
What is a personal habit that you think has helped you be more successful teaching?
I think that organization and efficiency are my strengths and the only reason that I'm not drowning most of the time. It can get overwhelming. When you think of, okay, my administration wants me to give high-quality education every day. So that's lessons I have to make. Mm-hmm. Then they want me to give assessments that are high quality and return the feedback on those assessments in a timely manner. So that's another area. Plus, I'm supposed to be constantly communicating with students and parents, attending meetings at all times, coming home and pretending to have a family life, and how does all that balance? And so I always have, lists on lists on lists and checklists because I think it is so easy in teaching. You see a lot of people quit in the second and third year of teaching, And they told us that in graduate school, and I thought, why? I wonder why. And then in my second and third year, I was like, now I know why everyone leaves this profession, because you just, and then you look at a test and you think, well, that was total junk. So next year I get to have the joy of rewriting that all over again. And so it never ends. It's, especially for somebody like me who likes to check things off a list, when it keeps coming back on the list, that's annoying. So I think efficiency and organization are the key. When you lose a kid's paper, that says something to them beyond the fact that you're disorganized. It says that I didn't really care about that piece of paper, so I can't find it in my portfolio here or whatever. And so, I don't want any kid to slip through the crack or feel like what they have done for me doesn't matter, nor do I want to ignore my parents. And that is a tough thing in teaching, is time management and efficiency. And I'm not there yet. But I think that those were skills that I had in college and in high school and in life prior to teaching that certainly didn't hurt me when I went into the teaching profession.
Got it. Can you share one of your favorite ed tech resources?
Ooh, that's a toughie. I really like, never use Google Translate. There's many funny YouTube videos of taking Fresh Prince of Bel-Air all the way through Google Translate, how much it messes up the whole song, and it just doesn't understand what you're trying to say. It's a great program. It does its job, but it doesn't understand how to be human.
Right.
And so I really love, for my kids, wordreference.com. And for all you language teachers out there, it's not just for French. There's, I think, 7 or 8 languages where the kids can type in an English word, and it will give it to them in French or German or Spanish or Russian or whatever, and in context. So when they're looking for the word fall, it will say as in summer, fall, winter, or as in I fall down. And so I like that very much. It tries to get the kids to understand, and then they can do it in the opposite, where they enter the language, the secondary language, and then it'll try and translate it into possibilities in English. I'm a big fan of a website for, it goes beyond world language, but for world language it's awesome, called Linked Language. It's a website on which I can post video, audio, images, or writing prompts, and the students can speak or write answers to it. So in French 2, we do art critique, and I can actually throw on images of famous paintings, and then they have to record their discussion of it, like, this sketch is black, it is not dynamic, it is, etc. It is more gray than the Impressionist piece. And best, as a teacher, I can give them either written or spoken feedback. And it's they don't have to have an account. They just enter an email address at which they would like to receive the feedback, so you don't have to worry about logging them in and keeping track of numbers. And so I'm a big fan of that website as well.
Great. Last question. Imagine you wake up one day and you're now the principal of your high school. What is the first thing that you would do?
I would change the way that time is managed at schools, because I have many colleagues across many types of schools, elementary, middle, and high school, and across many high schools. I know my fellow French teachers across high schools, and the number one thing is that if you want us to do all of these things, we have to have time to do them. And trust me, we didn't get into teaching because we thought we'd have to clock out every day at 3 o'clock. But on the contrary, finding the balance is obviously very difficult. And so when the idea that I would get together with pretend other French teachers and collaborate in the evening is just not realistic. And I sat through in my 10 years so many meetings that didn't need to even occur, thinking I could have used this time to sit down and collaborate across curriculum with the English teacher who's also doing a unit on the Holocaust, and here I am talking about the role of religion in France. But instead, we're sitting in a meeting which many times could have been communicated via email or done in a different format, or had built-in structure for collaboration and question, and how am I supposed to be a better teacher when I can't get to the people who know how to help me because they're busy teaching and I'm busy teaching, and then we're in meetings, and then we got to go pick up our kids from daycare, and it's really rough. So I think that if I was, the first thing I would do as principal is rework what time is allotted to what, rework the whole idea of meetings and their purpose, and go on from there. And that's so easy to just say.
Yeah.
I know that any administrator's like, yeah, I'd like to see you try, lady. But I think that's where it needs to go. These ideas of collaborative groups instead of I speak, you listen kind of meetings.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because that's definitely been a trend in business as well in terms of realizing that meetings are toxic on everyone's time and that there's much more efficient ways to get things done, right? So I think that's definitely a good one, and I'm sure that maybe some principals will listen and maybe take heed of what you just said. So that wraps up our podcast. And just to wrap up, if any of you listeners have any questions, please feel free to send us an email at hello@learnerator.com. Megan, as we said in the beginning, has been a fantastic teacher on our team. She created over 1,200 AP French language questions with solutions. We have audio, we have French and English solutions, so it's a very well-done course, and we're very happy to have someone like Megan on the team. If you are an AP French language teacher, please check out the course that we have, and please stay tuned for future podcasts if you're not an AP French language teacher, because we have a lot of interesting topics in the pipeline. All right, Megan, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.